All right, welcome to our Wednesday night Bible study. I'm really excited. I'm really glad that you have decided to join us. Whether this is your first time listening in or whether you've been with us through the very beginning, I'm glad that you're here. Now, if you are joining us for the first time, I do want to make mention that we are in chapter 37 and we've been going through the book of Genesis for quite a while now. So you may want to go back and listen to some of the earlier lessons and possibly work your way through up to today. If you have been with us this whole time, I pray that you have really enjoyed this and that you're getting a lot out of this. We are tonight starting into Genesis chapter 37. Last week, we touched on the fact that chapter 36 was really a discussion of Esau's descendants. And that's pretty much what chapter 36 is. It's a whole lot of names. It's a whole lot of discussion of tribes and chiefs of tribes and people that came from Esau. So the nation of the Edomites and those who would be considered Esau's descendants. 37 is where we are tonight. So if you have your Bible, let's take a look at that. And we will begin reading chapter 37. We're going to read the first 4 verses. We'll talk about it and then we'll move on. So 37, starting in verse 1, says, Jacob lived in the land of his father's sojourning, in the land of Canaan. These are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was pasturing the flock with his brothers. He was a boy with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives, and Joseph brought a bad report of them to their father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his sons, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a robe of many colors. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peacefully to him. All right, so the first thing that we want to notice is that the text tells us the geography, right? It gives us a bit of the geographical location. Jacob is in the land of Canaan. Now, this is the promised land. Now, it's important just for a moment for us to remember and to see that Jacob doesn't possess the land. He doesn't own this land. This is still a future promise from God. But the people of God, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, his sons, they've not taken possession of the land yet. That's not going to happen for hundreds of years. So they're still in this land as wandering strangers. They're holding on to the promise. They have the promise, but it's a future promise. It's a future fulfillment. So they're in the land, but they're wandering around pretty much as strangers at this point around the other tribes and peoples and nations. We also have the very familiar phrase, these are the generations of. Now, we've talked about this. Every time this comes up, we talk about it. And it's important because this is pretty much the structure, right? This is a structural element in the book of Genesis. It's found 10 times throughout the book of Genesis. And it gives us a clue that we are transitioning. Every time you see these are the generations of that phrase, or then you know that there's some kind of a transition happening. We're going from one event to another, possibly from one family to another, or one person to another. There's some kind of a major break, a major event, transition, or change that's happening. So what we see here is that we're getting this clue that there's going to be a change from the emphasis and the focus on Jacob to someone else. And we find out who that is. It's Joseph. Joseph is to be the main focus. He's the main character, pretty much. He's the main character throughout the rest of the book of Genesis. There'll be a couple other people that get some time, and there's some discussion that happens with some other folks. But basically, we are now at the beginning of the end of the book of Genesis. And this is that transition period, and we're going to be looking at Joseph, who is one of Jacob's sons. So he's the main guy that we're looking at from this point on. Now, how old was Joseph? What does the text say? Well, it says that he was 17 years old. So he's a young man. Now in that culture, in that society, he still would have been a youth, but he not quite the same as a 17-year-old maybe in our day and age, right? So there's a different mentality, or there should be. When a person is 17, they may very well have been married earlier than this, especially for women. But anyways, he's 17, so he's still a youth. He's a young man, but he's not a child. So he's 17 years old. Now, what was he doing? What does the text tell us that he was doing? As we begin to look at his life and the story, we see that he's pasturing his father's flocks, and he's doing that with some of his brothers. What do we know about Jacob in regard to Joseph? Well, the text tells us Jacob loved Joseph more than any of his other sons. Is this characteristic of Jacob? Yeah, it is. You'll remember that when he was taking wives, he originally wanted to take Rachel as his wife, but he ends up getting Leah instead. They're sisters, you'll remember. But the text says that he loved Rachel. And it also says that Leah was hated. Jacob is a man who has shown and is a man who shows favoritism. Now, where did he learn that? All right, he learned it from his father and his mother, right? Jacob was his mother's favorite. Esau was his father's favorite. So he grew up, he learned about favoritism from his family, and he has continued to show favoritism throughout his life. And we see it here again. We would want to think, we would want to hope that over this period of time that Jacob has changed so much that some of these negative behaviors, some of these sinful attitudes would have left him. And while he has changed, right, we don't want to take anything away. God has been working with him. Jacob has changed. He is a different person today than he was early on in his life. But he still has some baggage, right? He still has some things going on in his life. And favoritism is very destructive, right? Like any other sinful or wicked behavior or attitude or character, it's going to affect other people, and we're going to see that. We're going to see it affected Jacob's life earlier. It's going to continue to affect his life now. So we see that Jacob clearly loves his son Joseph more than all of his other sons. Now, do the brothers know this, right? Do Joseph's brothers, do they know that their father favors Joseph over and above them? Absolutely, right? How do we know? How do we know? Well, one way we know, this is at least one way that the text makes it clear, is because his father gives him a special coat, right? He gives him a coat of many colors. You've probably heard that before. This is a big sign. This is a big red flag. In some ways, you could think about this as being a big slap in the face to his other siblings. His father loves him more, and this coat demonstrates it. This is the chosen one, right? This is the favored, special child, and everybody knows it. How could you not know it? Every time Joseph is walking around and has this coat on, it's a big red flag. I'm the favorite, and so it's hard to miss. Now, Jacob hasn't hidden the fact that he loves Joseph more than others, right? He's not even trying to keep it hidden, right? And again, this coat is a great example of that. Now, how do the brothers of Joseph feel towards him, right? How do How do the brothers feel? What's their attitude towards Joseph? They hate him. And the text says that they couldn't speak a kind word to him, right? They couldn't speak peacefully to him. They had nothing good to say to him. They're so filled with hatred because of this favoritism that's going on in the family that they can't even speak a kind word to him. You ever known anybody like that? Maybe you were in a family like that. Maybe you were maybe you were the favorite child. Or maybe there was another sibling who was the favorite, and you just maybe had that attitude. You didn't even want to say any kind words to him or something along those lines, or maybe it happened to you, or whatever it happens to be. It's an uncomfortable situation for everybody involved, right? It's not good. There's plenty of blame. There's plenty of sin going around, even at this point, right? So what does Joseph do in verse 2? In verse 2, what does Joseph do? Well, it says this, being 17 years old, he was pasturing his flocks with his brothers. He was a boy with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives, and Joseph brought a bad report of them to their father. All right. What were the brothers doing? Well, we don't know. But it probably wasn't good because he brings a bad report. So something's going on. He brings a bad report of their behavior. How do you think this is going to help Joseph with his relationship with his brothers? Do you think that now that he is showing himself, we don't know if he's done this before in the past, may very well have, but in this event, at this scene, is this going to help, or is this going to continue to hurt his relationship with his brothers? Well, it's not going to help at all, is it? Joseph is now becoming a tattletale. Now, he could have been this kind of person earlier, right? He could have been raised by his father. It seems like he's raised by his father to be the spy in the family, or to be the one who is going to be the reporter. You know, I'm going to take down everything that you guys do, and I'm going to bring it back to Dad. So this is not going to help him, right? Now, let me ask you this question. Do you think Joseph is dim-witted or stupid? I mean, does he not know how his brothers feel about him up to this point? Well, of course he does, right? He knows how they feel. Verse 4 clearly says that they couldn't even speak a kind word to him. He knows that his brothers hate him. And so we need to keep this in mind, right? The reality is that the favorite child usually knows that they're the favorite, right? The favorite child usually knows that they're the favorite because the parents don't hide it. Everyone knows it. Everyone knows who the favorite child is. And that causes everyone involved, a lot of times, to act sinfully. Not always. Certainly there are some times when people will not go in the direction of sinful behavior. But a lot of times it's a recipe for disaster, you could say, right? It's a recipe for disaster. There's bad things on the horizon, and we're going to see what happens. So let's look now at verses 5 through 11. Let's read 5 through 11, and we'll continue on in this event. It says, "Now Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more." Notice the repetition of this. They hated him even more. So he has a dream, he tells his brothers. He said to them, "Hear this dream that I have dreamed. Behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and behold, my sheaf rose and stood upright. And behold, your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf." His brothers said to him, "Are you indeed to reign over us? Or are you indeed to rule over us?" So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. Verse 9, "Then he dreamed another dream and told it to his brothers and said, Behold, I have dreamed another dream. Behold, the sun, the moon, the 11 stars were bowing down to me. But when he told it to his father and to his brothers, his father rebuked him and said to him, "What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come to bow ourselves to the ground before you?" And his brothers were jealous of him. But his father kept the saying in mind. All right. So here we have Joseph, who has two dreams. The first dream he has is about some sheaves, right? The dream is about him and his brothers out in the field, and they're gathering, wheat or those kinds of things. And they're gathering these grains, and they're putting them into these bundles, these sheaves. And his sheaf raises up, it stands upright. But his brothers all fall down before his. Now, do the brothers understand the dream? Absolutely, right? They absolutely understand. In fact, they ask the question, if he thinks that he's going to be the ruler over them. Do you think that you're going to rule over us? Do you think that we are going to bow down to you? You're one of the youngest, and we're going to do that? Do the brothers begin to love him or hate him now? It's not like they're endeared to him, right? It's not like this dream has now caused them to rethink and say, you know what, oh, Joseph, we love you so much, and we're sorry for... There's no repentance here, nothing like that. This dream only serves to aggravate them. It only serves to draw them further and further away from their brother. There is a wedge being pushed in between all of these brothers. They simply grow in their hatred for Joseph. So Joseph dreams another dream, and this time it's about 11 stars, about the sun, and about the moon. Now, who does Joseph tell about this dream, right? He's had one dream he tells his brothers about. Now, who does he tell this one about? Well, he tells his brothers, but now he also tells his father as well. Now, I don't know if this was at the same time. He might have just busted in, and maybe they're having breakfast or something. We don't know the situation. We don't know how it unfolds. Is he telling them this over the morning coffee and cereal, or is this two separate occasions, or where he tells his father at one point and his brothers, or we don't know all of the details, but we know that he tells his brother and he tells his father. Whether they're together or not, or whatever it happens to be, he tells both groups of people. Now, why does Joseph, listen, think about this for a moment. Why does Joseph tell his brothers about the dream? Okay, well, let's pretend for a moment, right? Let's pretend for a moment that Joseph has the first dream, and he tells his brothers that he, and he doesn't realize that they're going to hate him even more, right? Let's pretend that he tells them this first dream about the sheaves, right? Bowing down to his and all that. And, let's say he's honestly doesn't understand, doesn't enter his mind that his brothers are going to hate him even more, right? Does Joseph know that his brothers hate him? Yes. When he has the dream, before he has the dream, he knows they hate him. But he has this dream, and we'll pretend for a moment he doesn't think that they're going to be angry about this. So he just shares the dream with them. Now, after he tells them, and he finds out that they hate him even more, right? There's no way that he doesn't know that they hate him even more. Kind of hard to hide your anger and your hatred for someone who you live and work with and all of that. So here's the question. Why would he tell them the second dream, knowing that they're going to hate him even more? They already hate him. He has the first dream, he tells them. They hate him even more. He has a second dream. Why in the world would he tell them again? Why would he tell them the second dream? Did God tell him that he needed to tell his brothers about this dream? No, there's nothing in the text. God is not in the midst of this in the sense of giving any direction. There's nothing in the text that says that he had to do this. He had two dreams, but was never told, as far as we know, to tell anyone. The dreams itself don't tell him to tell anyone. We have no word from God saying, I want you to go and tell everybody about this dream. Is Joseph stupid? Is he incapable of knowing how his brothers are going to respond to his dream? Absolutely not. I don't think Joseph is stupid. I think he's a very smart, bright young boy. And I'm of the view that he does this on purpose. Looking at the context, now there are some people who try to rescue Joseph from any kind of sinful behavior, right? I think that's a problem. Unless we are willing to say that he's dense, right? That he just doesn't get it and he doesn't know what's going on around him. Unless we're going to say that, I mean, we have to admit that he does this on purpose. Joseph is responsible for his actions. Absolutely true. But remember, he's also a product of his environment. His father and the wives of his father have all been deceitful. They've been scheming people. This is what he's raised in. You remember that his brothers, they scheme and are deceitful, and they slaughter a whole city, the city of Shechem. His father has been deceitful. He's raised in this environment, right? So he's acting just like the spoiled child. And he's attempting to rub his brother's noses in it. I don't think there's any way to get around that. He has two dreams on two separate nights, as far as the text seems to indicate here, and he tells his brothers on two separate occasions after he already knows that they hate him. He's the tattletale. He knows he's the favorite. His brothers hate him. He knows this. They can't even speak a nice, kind word to him. And he's going to continue to tell them about these dreams that clearly show his superiority over them. I think he's rubbing their noses in it. So, again, I think he's acting like the spoiled child that he is. I think he's a spoiled brat. Now, let's remember this. The people of God, right? The people of God, the people we find in the scriptures, and those heroes of the faith, sometimes act ungodly, wicked, and sinful. And I'm convinced that Joseph is doing that right here. I think he's immature. I think he's been raised as the favorite, and he's rubbing his brother's noses in the fact that his father loves him more, and now these dreams seem to indicate this, and so that's why he tells him. But think about other great heroes of the faith. You think about Abraham. Did Abraham ever waver in his faith? Did he ever sin? Absolutely. Did he ever put his wife in danger? Absolutely. We think about Jacob in his life. He's at a train wreck of a life in a lot of areas. Think about King David. King David was a man after God's own heart, and yet he was not only an adulterer, but he was a murderer, and he was a liar in the sense of being deceptive and trying to murder Uriah the Hittite, and he accomplishes that. You look at the heroes of the faith, and we've got to be careful. Yes, they were great men of faith and great women of faith. They did wonderful things. A lot of times we see their great faith acted out and all of that. That's important. But they were not sinlessly perfect. So there's no reason for us to assume that Joseph here is so dim-witted that he wouldn't understand that telling his brothers these dreams was not going to infuriate them. Well, let's stop there, and we will pick it up again next week. So I hope and pray that this has been a blessing to you. Go back, reread the text, think about it, and see what you think, and be ready to study again next week. God bless.